Infanteria, to je láska má. Infanteria.
I would like to move on and introduce our next group. So let me pull up the visual for that. For chapter 14, the longest chapter in part one, it's going to be epic in its own right, this chapter. So part one, we will have Jaci de Villiers, a South African director, playwright, and actor with us here in New York City, and with her Kees de Villiers, a South African actor, playwright, and director, also with her in New York City. And so they'll be together. And after that, we will have Tom Dula, an accountant here in New York. And then after that, we're going to move west to Christian Hilci, my colleague, a lecturer in Czech at the University of Texas at Austin. Then moving into part 3 of chapter 14, Lisa Arrindell, an actor and acting instructor in Brooklyn, New York, and T.D. White, actor and filmmaker in New York. Pressing onward into part 4, we'll have Edward Einhorn, artistic director of the Untitled Theater Company, number 61 here in New York, and Katarina Vizina, an actor and singer in New York. And to finish off this set of readings in part 5, we have a team from the University of Chicago. It's going to start out with 2 students, Meg Doucette and Piers Pramuka, who are both studying Czech, and their instructor, Irena Čajková, instructional professor in Czech at U Chicago. And so with that, I will disappear.
Švejk's good fortune did not last long. Unrelenting fate severed the friendly relations between him and the chaplain. If until this event the chaplain had been a likable person, what he now did was calculated to strip from him his likable image. The chaplain sold Švejk to Lieutenant Lukáš, or to be more correct, gambled him away at cards, just as they used to sell serfs in Russia in the old days. It happened quite unexpectedly. Lieutenant Lukáš gave a splendid party and they played Vantian. The chaplain lost everything and said in the end, "How much will you advance me on my Batman? He's a screaming half-wit and an interesting personality, a kind of non plus ultra. You never had a Batman like him before." "I'll advance you 100 crowns, Lieutenant Lukáš offered. If I don't get them back the day after tomorrow, you can send me this rare specimen. My own Batman is a disgusting fellow. He's always groaning, writes letters home, and at the same time steals what he can lay his hands on. I've already beaten him, but it doesn't do any good. I box his ears whenever I meet him, but that doesn't help either. I've knocked out some of his front teeth, but even that hasn't improved the bastard." "Oh, agreed then," said the chaplain light-heartedly. "Either 100 crowns the day after tomorrow or Švejk." And he gambled away those 100 crowns too, and went home sadly. He knew for certain, and had never doubted, that in 2 days he could not possibly rustle up those 100 crowns, and that he had actually bartered Švejk away basely and despicably. I might just as well have said 200, he said to himself angrily. But when he changed onto the tram, which would soon take him home, he had an attack of conscience and sentimentality. "Oh, it wasn't gentlemanly of me to do it," he thought, as he rang at the door of his apartment. "How can I look into his stupid, kind eyes?"
"My dear Švejk," he said when he was home, "today something unusual happened. I had awfully bad luck in cards. I went banco, and I had the ace in my hand, and then a 10 came, but the banker had the knave in his hand and made 21 too. I drew an ace or a 10 several times, but the banker always had the same. I went through all my money." He paused. "And finally, I gambled you away. I borrowed 100 crowns on you, and if I don't return it by the day after tomorrow, you won't belong to me any longer, but to Lieutenant Lucage. I'm very sorry. If it's only 100 crowns, said Švejk, I can lend it to you. Give it to me, said the chaplain, brightening up. I'll take it at once to Lucage. I should really hate to have to part with you. Lucage was very surprised when he saw the chaplain again. I'm coming to repay my debt, said the chaplain, looking around triumphantly. Let me join the game. Banco, shouted the chaplain when it was his turn. I'm only 1 pip over, he announced. All right then, Banco again, he said when the second round came, and blind. Paying 20, announced the banker. I've got 19 altogether, said the chaplain quietly, and paid the bank the last 40 crowns of the 100 which Švejk had lent him to ransom himself from his new serfdom. On his way home, the chaplain came to the conclusion that it was all finished, that nothing could save Švejk, and that it was predestined that he should be Lieutenant Lucage's Batman. And when Švejk opened the door, he told him, It's all up, Švejk. No one can escape his fate. I have lost you and your 100 crowns too. I did my utmost, but fate was stronger than me. I've thrown you into the clutches of Lieutenant Lucage, and the time is coming when we must part. And was there a lot in the bank? Asked Švejk calmly. Didn't you get a chance of being forehand very often? If the right card doesn't come, it's very bad. But sometimes it's awful when the cards are too good. At Steda's, there was a tinsmith called Vojáka, and he always used to play mariage in a pub behind the Century Cafe. Once, the devil whispered into his ear, How about a game of Vantian at 10 hella stakes? And so they played Vantian at 10 hellas, and he held the bank. They all joined the game, and then the bank grew to 10 crowns. Old Vojáka wanted to help the others, and so he kept on saying, Low and bad is safe. But you can't imagine what bad luck he had. However low his card was, it was never worse than what the others had. The bank grew and grew, and there was already 100 crowns in it. None of the players had enough to go banco, and Vojáka sat there sweating. You couldn't hear anything except his low and bad is safe. One after another, people joined in with 10 crown stakes, and all of them burst. A master chimney sweep got furious and went home for more money. He went banco when there was already more than 150 in the bank. Vojáka wanted to get himself out of the game, and as he confessed afterwards, he tried to push the bidding up to as much as 30 just so as not to win.
But instead he got 2 aces. He pretended he had nothing and said on purpose, paying 16s, and that chimney sweep had only 15. Wasn't that bad luck? Old Vojáka was quite pale and miserable. All round they were swearing and muttering that he was cheating and that he'd already been flogged for card sharping, although he was really a very honest player. And so they all of them paid in crown after crown, and there was already 500 crowns there. The landlord couldn't stand it any longer. He had money ready to pay the brewery, and so he took it, sat down, pushed forward 200, and then 200 again. After that, he shut his eyes, spun the chair round for luck, and said, he'll go banco, and we'll play overt, he declared. I don't know what old Vojáka wouldn't have given to have lost. Everybody was amazed when he drew a card from the pack, and it was a 7, and he took it. The landlord was smiling up his sleeve because he had 21. Old Vojáka drew a second 7, and still he took it. Now an ace or 10 will come, said the landlord maliciously. I bet my last shirt, Mr. Vojáka, that you'll burst. There was a deathly silence. Vojáka drew again and a third 7 appeared. The landlord turned white as a sheet because it was his last sow. He went into the kitchen, and a short time afterwards, his apprentice boy ran in and called us to come and cut the landlord down because he was hanging on a window handle. And so we cut him down, revived him, and the game went on. No one had any money left at all. Everything was in the bank in front of Vojevoda, who only went on saying, "Low and bad is safe." And he would have given everything in the world to burst, but because he had to expose his hand on the table, he couldn't cheat and intentionally overbid. They were all furious over his good luck and arranged that when they had no more money left, they would give him IOUs. It went on for several hours, and thousands heaped up in front of old Vojevoda. The chimney sweep was already more than 1.5 million in debt to the bank, a coalman from Sederas about 1 million, a porter from the Century Cafe 8 times 100,000, and a medico over 2 million. In the pool alone, there was more than 300,000 on little bits of paper. Old Vojevoda tried all different tricks. He went continually to the WC and always asked someone else to draw for him. And when he returned, they told him that he had drawn and got 21. They sent for new cards, but still that didn't help.
When Vojevoda stopped at 15, the other had only 14. They all looked furiously at old Vojevoda, and the man who swore at him most was a paver who had only put in 8 crowns in cash. He stated openly that a man like Vojevoda shouldn't be allowed to go about free, but deserved to be beaten up, thrown out, and drowned like a puppy. You can't imagine old Vojevoda's despair. Finally, he had an idea. "I am going to the WC," he said to the chimney sweep. "Draw for me, will you?" And then he went out, just as he was without a hat on, to the street, and straight to Myslikova Street for the police. He found a patrol and told them that in such and such a pub they were playing gambling games. The police ordered him to go ahead, and they would follow immediately after. He came back and was told that in the meanwhile, the medico had lost over 2 million and the porter over 3. In the pool, there were IOUs for 5 times 100,000 crowns. After a while, the policeman burst in. The paver screamed out, "Everyone for himself!" But it was no good. They confiscated the bank and took all the players off to the police station. The coalman from Steras resisted, and so they brought him along in the drunk's cart. In the bank, there were IOUs for over 500,000 and 1,500 crowns in cash. "I've never copped as much as that before," said the police inspector when he saw such dizzy sums. "It's worse than in Monte Carlo." All of them, except old Vojevoda, had to stay there till morning. He was released for turning king's evidence and was promised that he would get as his lawful reward 1/3 of the money confiscated in the bank, about 160 million or more. But before the morning, he was already off his head and was going about Prague ordering burglar-proof safes by the dozen. That's what they call success at cards. And then Švejk went off to brew some grog. And it happened that when, with some difficulty, he succeeded in getting the chaplain into bed that night, the latter burst into tears and cried, "I've bartered you, my friend. I've shamefully bartered you. Curse me, beat me, I'll take it. I let you down. I can't look you in the eyes. Tear me, bite me, destroy me. I don't deserve anything better. Do you know what I am?" And the chaplain, pressing his tear-stained face into the pillow, said gently in a soft, tender voice, "I am a bastard without any character at all," and fell asleep like a log. The next day, shunning Švejk's gaze, the chaplain went out early and returned late at night with a fat infantryman.
"Show him, Švejk, where everything is, so that he can get his bearings," he said, avoiding his gaze. "And show him how to make grog. Tomorrow you are to report to Lieutenant Lukáš." Švejk spent the night agreeably with the new man making grog. By the morning, the fat infantryman could hardly stand on his legs and was humming a strange potpourri of various national songs which he mixed up together. Around Cordova there runs a stream, my love serves red beer there. Mountain, mountain, thou art high. Maidens went along the path, on the white mountain a peasant is plowing. I'm not worried about you, said Švejk. With a talent like that, you'll keep your job with a chaplain. And so it happened that in the morning, Lieutenant Lukáš saw for the first time the decent and honest countenance of the good soldier Švejk, who announced to him, humbly report, sir, I am Švejk, whom the chaplain gambled away at cards. And with this, we hand over the baton to Tom Dula, also in New York.
The institution of officers' orderlies is of very ancient origin. It seems that even Alexander the Great had his batmen. What is certain, however, is that in the period of feudalism, the knights' hirelings performed this role. What else is Don Quixote's Sancho Panza? I am surprised that no one has yet written the history of army orderlies. If anyone had, we should read how in the siege of Toledo, the Duke of Almaviva was so hungry that he ate his orderly without salt, which the Duke himself mentions in his memoirs, relating that his orderly had fine, tender, succulent meat, tasting something like chicken or donkey. In an old German book about the art of war, we find directions for orderlies. The batmen of the old days had to be pious, virtuous, truthful, modest, courageous, brave, honest, industrious. In short, he had to be a model man. Modern times have changed this type considerably. The modern batman is usually not very pious, or virtuous, or truthful. He tells lies, cheats his master, and very often turns his superior's life into sheer hell. He is a cunning slave who thinks out the most varied forms of treacherous ploys to embitter his master's life. In this new generation of batmen, you will not find such self-sacrificing creatures as would let themselves be eaten by their masters without salt, like the noble Fernando, batman of the Duke of Almaviva. On the other hand, we find commanders who wage a life and death struggle with their orderlies of modern times and adopt the most varied methods to preserve their authority. This is a certain kind of terror. In 1912, there was a trial in Graz in which the leading figure was a captain who had kicked his batman to death. He was acquitted then because it was only the second time he had done it. In the eyes of gentlemen like this, the life of a batman has no value at all. He's only an object, often an Aunt Sally, a slave, a maid of all work. It is not surprising that such a position requires of the slave that he should be crafty and cunning. His position on this planet can be compared only with that of the sufferings of the potboys of old, who were trained to be conscientious by means of blows and torture. There are, however, cases where a batman rises to the position of favorite, and then he becomes the terror of the company or the battalion. All the NCOs try to bribe him. He decides questions of leave and can use his influence and see that it goes well with those who are sent on report. These favorites were usually rewarded in wartime with the large and small silver medals for valor and bravery. In the 91st Regiment, I knew several of them. One batman received the large silver medal because he was an adept in roasting the geese he had stolen. Another got the small silver medal because he used to get from his home wonderful food hampers so that, in the time of the most acute famine, his master stuffed himself up so much that he could hardly walk. And his master formulated the citation for his decoration as follows: "For displaying unusual bravery and courage in battle, despising death and not abandoning his superior officer for a moment, under the powerful fire of the advancing enemy." But in fact, he was plundering the hen coops somewhere on the base. The war changed the relationship between the Batman and his master and made him the creature who was most hated by the rank and file. The Batman always got the whole tin of meat, where otherwise it would be divided among 5. His field flask was always full of chocolate, rum, or cognac, the whole day. He munched and devoured sweet biscuits reserved for officers, smoked his master's cigarettes, cooked for hours on end, and wore an extra tunic. The Batman was on the closest terms with the company orderly, and he gave him fat pickings from his table and from all those privileges which he enjoyed. He allowed into the triumvirate the quartermaster, sergeant major. This trio lived in direct contact with the officer and knew all the operations and war plans. The unit whose corporal was friendly with the Batman was always best informed about when things would start. When he said, "At 2:35, we shall start hopping it," then at 2:35 exactly, the Austrian soldiers began to disengage from the enemy. The Batman was on the most intimate terms with the field kitchen and always liked to hang around the cauldron and give orders as though he were in a restaurant and had the menu before him. "I'd like a rib," he would say to the cook. "Yesterday you gave me the tail, and add a piece of liver to my soup. You know I don't eat milt." But the Batman was always in best form when starting a panic. When the trenches were being bombed, his heart ran down into his pants. In such times, he was always in the most secure cover, together with his luggage and that of his master. He covered his head with a rug in case a shell should find him, and he had no other wish than that his master should be wounded and that he could go with him to the base as far as possible behind the front line. He cultivated panic systematically by the use of a certain measure of secrecy. "I've got a hunch they're packing the telephone up," he would say confidentially to the units, and he was happy when he was able to say, "Now they've packed it up." No one loved the retreat as much as he did. In such moments, he forgot that shell and shrapnel were flying over his head and pushed on indefatigably with the luggage to staff headquarters where the baggage train was standing. He loved the Austrian baggage train and was very happy when he could travel on it. In emergencies, he would use ambulance two-wheelers. When he had to go on foot, he gave the impression of being a completely broken man. In that case, he abandoned his master's luggage in the trenches and took his own property with him. Should it happen that the officer escaped capture by running away and the Batman was caught, he never forgot under any circumstances to take his master's luggage with him into captivity. It then passed into his ownership, and he clung to it with might and main. I once saw a captured Batman who had gone on foot with others from Dubno to Darnica beyond Kiev. Besides his own haversack, he had with him the haversack of his superior officer who had escaped capture, 5 hand cases of different shape and size, 2 blankets, and a pillow, apart from another piece of luggage which he carried on his head. He complained that the Cossacks had stolen 2 of his cases. I shall never forget that man who dragged himself in this way across the whole of the Ukraine. He was a walking removal van. And I can never understand how he was able to carry off this luggage and drag it for so many hundreds of kilometers and then go with it as far as Tashkent, look after it, and die of spotted typhus on it in a prison camp. Today, Batmen are scattered over the whole of our republic, and they tell of their heroic deeds. It was they who stormed Sokol, Dubno, Niš, and Piave. Every one of them is a Napoleon. I told our colonel to ring staff headquarters and say, "It can start." Most of them were reactionaries, and the rank and file hated them. Some of them were informers, and it was their special delight to watch someone being seized and bound. They developed into a special caste. Their selfishness knew no ends. The next reader will be Christian Hilche in Austin, Texas.
And it looks like we have another no-show. Not sure if Christian's having technical difficulties, but I don't see him in the panel. So our pinch hitter extraordinaire, Hořejš, is going to continue for us with part 3 of section 14. 17.
And should Christian show up, we will help him to jump in the text rather than repeating from the beginning. Lieutenant Lukács was a typical regular officer of the ramshackle Austrian monarchy. The cadet school had turned him into a kind of amphibian. He spoke German in society, wrote German, read Czech books, and when he taught in the course of 1 year volunteers, all of whom were Czechs, he told them in confidence, "Let's be Czechs, but no one need know about it. I'm a Czech too." He equated being a Czech with membership of some sort of secret organization to which it was wiser to give a wide berth. Otherwise, he was a decent man who was not afraid of his superiors and looked after his company at maneuvers as was seemly and proper. He always found them comfortable quarters in barns and often let the soldier roll out a barrel of beer at the expense of his own modest salary. He liked it when his men sang songs on the march. They had to sing even when they went to and from drill. And walking by the side of his company, he sang with them. And when it was midnight black, the oats jumped out of the sack. Tan, tan, ta, zing, boom. He enjoyed the affection of his men because he was unusually just and was not in the habit of bullying anyone. The NCOs trembled before him, and in a month he could reduce the most brutal sergeant major to a perfect lamb. He could shout, it is true, but he never swore. He used choice expressions and sentences. "You see," he said, "I really don't like punishing you, my boy, and I can't help it, but I can't help it because the efficiency and courage of an army depends on discipline, and without discipline, an army is a reed swaying in the wind. If you don't have your uniform in order and your buttons properly sewn on, or if they're missing, it is obvious that you are neglecting the responsibilities you owe to the army. Perhaps it may seem incomprehensible to you that you are being put in detention just because yesterday at an inspection there was one button missing on your tunic. In other words, a tiny, unimportant matter which in civil life would be completely overlooked, but you see, in the army, neglect of your personal appearance like that must result in your punishment. And why? It's not a question here of a missing button, but of your having to get used to order. Today you forget to sew on a button and start getting slack. Tomorrow you'll already find it a bore to dismantle your rifle and clean it. The day after you'll forget your bayonet in a pub somewhere, and finally you'll fall asleep at your post. Because with that unfortunate button, you already started on the downward career of a scrimshanker. So that's it, my boy, and I'm punishing you to save you from an even worse punishment for things you might do if you slowly but surely begin to forget your duties. I am sending you to detention for 5 days, and over your bread and water I want you to reflect that punishment is not revenge, but just a means of education. Its object is to reform and improve the soldier who is being punished. He should have been a captain long since his cautiousness in the nationality question had not helped him, because he always behaved towards his superiors with complete frankness, and any kind of bootlicking in official relations was beneath him. This is what he had retained of the character of a peasant from South Bohemia, where he was born in a village among dark forests and lakes. Although he was just to the soldiers and did not bully them, he had one special trait in his character trait. He hated his batmen, because he always had the bad luck to get the most disgusting and mean ones imaginable. He hit them across the jaw, boxed their ears, and tried to train them by precept and deed, not looking upon them as soldiers. He struggled with them hopelessly for a number of years, changed them continually, and finally sighed, "Now I've got another filthy bastard." He regarded his batman as the lowest form of animal life. He was very fond of animals. He had a Hart's canary, an Angora cat, and a stable pincher. All the batmen in turn treated these animals no worse than Lieutenant Lukáš treated them when they too did something mean. They starved the canary. One batman knocked one of the Angora cat's eyes out. They beat the stable pincher every time they saw it. And finally one of Švejk's predecessors took the wretched animal off to Pankráz, to the skinner, where he had him put away, paying 10 crowns for it from his own pocket without any regrets. Then he simply told the lieutenant that the dog had run away from him on a walk. The very next day the batman was marching with the company to the drill ground. When Švejk came to report to Lukáš that he was starting his duties, the latter took him into the sitting room and said, "The chaplain recommended you, and I hope you won't disgrace this recommendation. I've already had a dozen batmen, and not one of them has ever settled down with me. I must warn you that I'm strict, and that I punish terribly any meanness or lying. I require you always to tell me the truth and to carry out all my orders without grumbling. If I say to you, 'Jump into the fire,' then you must jump into the fire, even though you don't want to." What are you looking at?" Švejk was looking with interest sideways at the wall where a cage hung with a canary in it, and fixing his kindly eyes on the lieutenant, he answered in a gentle, good-natured tone, "Humbly report, sir, there's a Hart's canary there." And after having interrupted in this way the flow of the lieutenant's words, Švejk adopted a military stance and looked him straight in the eye without blinking. The lieutenant wanted to say something sharp, but observing the innocent expression on Švejk's face, said nothing more than, "The chaplain recommended you as a frightful idiot, and I think he was not wrong." "Humbly report, sir, he certainly was not wrong. When I was serving as a regular, I got a complete discharge for idiocy and for patent idiocy into the bargain. In our regiment, only 2 of us were discharged in this way, me and Captain von Kaunitz. And whenever that captain went out in the street, if you'll pardon me, sir, he always at the same time picked his left nostril with his left hand and his right nostril with his right hand. And when he went with us to the parade ground, he always made us adopt a formation as though it was going to be a march past, and said, men, remember that today is Wednesday, because tomorrow will be Thursday. Lieutenant Lukas shrugged his shoulders like a man who did not know how to express a certain thought and could not immediately find words to do so. He went from the door to the window on the other side of the room, past Švejk and back again. All this time Švejk did eyes right or eyes left whenever the lieutenant was, wherever he was, and did it with such a marked expression of innocence on his face that the lieutenant lowered his gaze to the carpet and said something which had no connection at all with Švejk's observation about the stupid captain. Yes, with me there's got to be order, cleanliness, and no lying. I like honesty. I hate lies, and I punish them mercilessly. Do you understand? And Lisa Arrindell is joining us from New York City, and I am up in the Hudson Valley, not very far from that city. Go ahead.
Humbly report, sir. I understand. There's nothing worse than when someone tells a lie. As soon as he starts getting tied up, he's done for. In a village behind Pelhřimov, there was once a teacher named Marek who used to keep company with the daughter of the gamekeeper, Spera. The gamekeeper gave him to understand that if ever he had a rendezvous with the girl in the forest, he found him there, he'd shoot a brush full of salt into his backside. The teacher sent him a message that it was not true. But once when he was going to meet the girl, the gamekeeper caught him and was just about to carry out the operation on him when the teacher excused himself by saying that he was only picking flowers. And then, after that, he said he had gone to catch some beetles and got more and more tied up until finally he got into a panic and swore that he had gone out to set traps for hares. And so the good gamekeeper seized him and took him away to the gendarmerie station, and from there the case went to the courts, and the teacher might easily have been sent to prison for it if he'd just said just the bare truth. He'd only have got the brushes with the salt. I'm of the opinion that it's always best to confess, to be open, and if I've done something, to come and say, humbly report, sir, I've done this and that. And as for honesty, that's always a jolly good thing because it's always the best policy. It's just like in those walking races. As soon as a chap begins to cheat and run, he's already disqualified. That happened to my cousin. An honest man's respected everywhere. He's honored, satisfied with himself, and feels newborn when he can go to bed and say, today, I have played the game again. While he was speaking to Lieutenant Lukas, sat for a long time on his chair, looking at Švejk's boots and thinking, my God, I often talk drivel like this too. And the only difference is the form I serve it up in. Nonetheless, not wishing to lose his authority, he said to Švejk, had ended, he said when Švejk had ended. "With me, you must clean your boots, have your uniform in order, your buttons properly sewn on, and give an impression of being a soldier and not a miserable civvy. It's extraordinary how none of you seem to be able to carry yourselves like soldiers. Only one of all my batemen looked like a real warrior, and in the end, he went and stole my full dress uniform and sold it in the Jewish quarter." He was silent and then continued explaining to Švejk all his duties, in the course of which he did not forget to lay the main emphasis on the fact that he must be loyal and never talk about what was happening at his home. "Ladies pay me visits," he added. "Sometimes one of them stays overnight. If I'm not on duty the next day, if that happens, you'll bring us our coffee in bed when I ring. Do you understand?" "Humbly report, I understand, sir. If I should come to the bed without warning, it might perhaps be disagreeable for the lady. I once brought a young lady home and my charwoman brought us coffee in bed just when we were enjoying ourselves immensely. She got frightened and poured the coffee all over my back and said into the bargain, 'A very good morning to you.' I know what is seemly and proper when there's a lady sleeping somewhere. Good Švejk! We must always show exceptional tact to the ladies," said the lieutenant, who was getting into a better temper because the conversation was touching a subject which filled his leisure hours between the barracks, the parade grounds, and card playing. Women were the life and soul of his apartment. It was they who made his home for him. There were several dozen of them, and many tried during their stay to adorn his flat with various bric-a-brac. One lady, the wife of a cafe proprietor, who lived with him for a whole fortnight until her husband came for her and took her home, embroidered for him a delightful table runner, put monograms on all his underclothing, and might indeed, perhaps, have completed the embroidery of the wall hangings if her husband had not destroyed the idyll. Another lady, whom her parents fetched after 3 weeks, wanted to turn his bedroom into a lady's boudoir and placed everywhere various fancy things in little vases and hung a picture of the guardian angel over his bed. In all corners of his bedroom and dining room, the traces of a feminine hand could be felt. And this extended to the kitchen, where could be seen the most varied kitchen implements and utensils, which had been the magnificent gift of the lovesick wife of a factory owner. Together with her passion, she brought with her a gadget for cutting all kinds of greens and cabbages, a machine for making breadcrumbs and scraping liver, various casseroles, roasters, frying pans, basting ladles, and God knows what else. But she went away after a week because she could not reconcile herself to the thought that the lieutenant had besides her some 20 other loves, which left certain traces on the performance of the noble male in his uniform. Lieutenant Lukáš also carried on a voluminous correspondence. He had an album of his lady loves and a collection of various relics, because for the last 2 years he had evinced a tendency to fetishism. Thus, he had a number of different ladies' garters, 4 delightful pairs of ladies' knickers with embroidery, and 3 transparent fine thin chemises, cambric kerchiefs, and even a corset, and a number of stockings. "Today I am on duty," he said. "I shan't come back till night. have everything ready and put the apartment in order. My last abatement went off today to the front in the march column because of his skullduggery. After giving further orders concerning the cannery and the Angora cat, he went away without forgetting to make a few remarks about honesty and order while still in the doorway. After his departure, Švejk put everything into the finest order so that when the Lieutenant Lukáš returned to his home at night, he could report to him, "Humbly report, sir, everything is in order. Only the cat has got into mischief and eaten up the cannery." "What?" thundered the lieutenant. "Humbly report, sir, it was like this. I knew that cats hate canneries and like to insult them, and so I thought I'd introduce them to each other, and if the brute tried anything on, I'd flay her so that she'd remember to her dying day how to behave towards canneries, because I'm very fond of animals. In the house where I live, there's a hat maker, and he trained his cat so well that after eating up 3 of his canneries, she didn't eat anymore. A cannery could sit on her if it liked, and I wanted to try that out too, and so I took the cannery out of its cage and let her smell it, and she, the little monkey, bit its head off before I realized it. I really never expected such a caddishness from her. If it had been a sparrow, sir, I wouldn't have said anything, but a lovely canary like that from the hearts. And how greedily she gobbled it up, feathers and all, and at the same time purred out of sheer joy. They say cats have no musical education and can't stand it when a canary sings because the brutes don't understand it. I swore at the cat, but I swear to God that I didn't do anything to her and waited for you to come to decide what's to be done with her, the scabby beast." While saying this, Švejk looked into the lieutenant's eyes with such sincerity that although the latter approached him at first with certain cruel intentions, he moved away from him again, sat down on a chair and asked, "Listen, Švejk, are you really God's prize oaf?" "Humbly report, sir," Švejk answered solemnly. "I am. Ever since I was little, I have had bad luck like that. I always want to put something right, to do good, but nothing ever comes out of it except trouble for me and all around. I really wanted these two to get to know each other so that they would understand each other, and I can't help it if she ate it up, and it was the end of the acquaintance. In a house called Yush Tu Partu some years ago, a cat even ate up a parrot because it laughed and mimicked her meowing, but cats cling pretty obstinately to their lives. If you want me to do her in, sir, then I'll have to crush her in the door, otherwise she'll never be finished." And Švejk, with the most innocent of countenances and his gentle, I welcome to the stage T.D. White, Tom D. White from New York City.
Thank you, Lisa. And Švejk, with the most innocent of countenances and his gentle, good-humored smile, gave the lieutenant an account of how cats are executed, the content of which would certainly send any society for the prevention of cruelty to animals into a lunatic asylum. In telling this, he revealed such expert knowledge that Lieutenant Lukáš forgot his answer and asked, "So you know how to look after animals? Have you got some feeling for them? Do you love them?" "I like dogs best of all, sir," said Švejk. because they offer a profitable business for anyone who knows how to sell them. I wasn't able to do it because I've always been honest. But all the same, people used to be after me and say I'd sold them a lame duck instead of a healthy thoroughbred, as though all dogs must be thoroughbred and healthy. And everyone at once asked for a pedigree, so that I had to have pedigrees printed and turn some mongrel from Kozice, which had been born in a brickworks, into the most thoroughbred aristocrat from the Bavarian kennels of Armin von Barheim. And really, people were only too happy if it turned out so well that they had a thoroughbred at home. I could perhaps have offered them a Versovitza Palm as a dachshund, and they would only have been rather surprised that such a rare dog coming all the way from Germany was shaggy and didn't have bow legs. They do that in all kennels. You should see, sir, the fiddles which go on with these pedigrees in the big kennels. There are really very few dogs existing which could say of themselves, I'm a thoroughbred. I mean, either its mama forgot herself with some frightful monstrosity, or its granny did, or else it's had several papas and inherited a bit from each. From one its ears, from another its tail, from another again the tufts on its snout, from a third its muzzle, from a fourth its hobbling legs, and from a fifth its size. And if it had had 12 such papas, you can imagine, sir, what such a dog looks like. I once bought a dog like that called Balaban. After all his papas, he was so ugly that all dogs avoided him, and I only bought him out of pity because he was so abandoned. And he always used to sit at home in a corner and was so unhappy till they had to sell him as a stable pincher. What gave me the most trouble was dyeing him so that he had a pepper and salt color. In this condition, he went to his master in Moravia, and from that time on, I've never set eyes on him anymore. The lieutenant began to be extremely interested by this sinological lecture, and Švejk was able to continue without interruption. Dogs can't dye their hair like ladies do. This always has to be done by the person who wants to sell them. If a dog is so old that it's completely gray, and you want to sell it as a year-old puppy or pretend that the old Dotterer is only 9 months old, then you must buy some silver nitrate, dissolve it, and paint the dog black so that it looks quite like new. And you must feed it like a horse with arsenic so that it gains strength. And you must clean its teeth with sandpaper, like they use for cleaning rusty knives. And before you lead it out to be sold to a customer, you must pour some slivovitz down its throat so that it gets a bit tipsy. Then it'll immediately get lively, gay, bark joyfully, and make friends with anyone, like a drunken town councilor. But the main thing is this: you must talk to people, sir, and go on talking to them until the customer gets completely crazy. If anyone wants to buy a miniature pincher off you, and you have nothing else at home but a pointer, you must be able to talk him into taking away with him a pointer and not a miniature pincher. And if by chance you only have a miniature pincher at home and someone comes to buy a fierce German Mastiff for a watchdog, you must fool him so that he takes away in his pocket the tiny little miniature pincher instead of the Mastiff. When I used to be in the business, a lady came in to tell me that her parrot had flown out into her garden. So she said, and that some little boys who were playing Indians in front of a villa had just seized it, torn all the feathers from its tail, and decked themselves up in them like police. And this parrot, out of shame of being tailless, fell ill, and the vet finished it off with some powders. And so she wanted to buy a new parrot, a respectable one, not a vulgar one, which would do nothing but swear. What could I do when I hadn't a parrot at home and didn't know of one? I only had at home a savage bulldog, which was completely blind. And so, sir, I had to spend from 4 o'clock in the afternoon till 7 o'clock in the evening talking that lady into buying that blind bulldog instead of a parrot. It was worse than any diplomatic situation. And when she was going out, I said, now let the boys try to pull his hair out. And I never spoke to this lady anymore. She had to leave Prague on account of that bulldog because it bit everyone in the house. Believe me, sir, it's very difficult to get hold of a decent animal. I'm very fond of dogs, said the lieutenant. Some of my friends at the front have their dogs with them there and have written to me that the war passes very pleasantly when you have as a companion such a faithful and devoted animal. And so I see you know all breeds of dogs. Very well, and I hope that if I ever should have a dog, you'd look after it properly. Which breed do you think is the best? I mean, as a companion, you know? I once had a stable pincher, but I don't know. Well, in my opinion, sir, a stable pincher is a very nice dog. Not everyone likes them, it is true, because they have wire hair and very stiff whiskers on their muzzle, so that they look like a released convict. They are so ugly that they're beautiful. And at the same time, they're very clever. What's an idiotic great Saint Bernard in comparison? They're even cleverer than fox terriers. You know, I knew one. Lieutenant Lukash looked at his watch and interrupted Švejk's conversation. Oh, it's getting late. I must have a good sleep. Tomorrow I'm on duty again, and you can spend the whole day finding a stable pincher for me. We went to bed, and Švejk lay down on a sofa in the kitchen and read the newspaper, which the lieutenant had brought with him from the barracks. Well, here you are then, said Švejk to himself, following with interest the summary of the day's news. The Sultan has decorated Kaiser Wilhelm with the war medal, and I haven't even got the small silver medal yet. He thought for a moment and then jumped up. Oh, I nearly forgot. He went into the bedroom of the lieutenant, who was already fast asleep, and woke him. Humbly report, sir. I've no orders about that cat. And the sleepy lieutenant, half awake, turned over on the other side and growled, 3 days confined to barracks, and went on sleeping. Švejk went softly out of the room, dragged the wretched cat from underneath the sofa, and said to her, you've got 3 days confined to barracks. Dismiss! And the Angora cat crawled back under the sofa again. Our next reader will be playwright Edward Einhorn, the artistic director of the Untitled Theater Company number 66. Thank you. Humbly report.
Švejk was just starting to go and look for a stable pincher when a young lady rang the bell and asked to speak to Lieutenant Lukash. Beside her stood 2 heavy suitcases, and Švejk caught a glimpse of a porter's cap disappearing down the stairs. He's not at home, said Švejk firmly, but the young lady was already in the hall and gave the categorical order to Švejk, carry the suitcases in. Not without the lieutenant's permission, madam, said Švejk. The lieutenant gave express orders that I must never do anything without his permission. You're dotty, the young lady cried. I've come to stay with him. I have no information about that, answered Švejk. The lieutenant is on duty today. He won't be back before night, and I've had orders to go and find him a stable pincher. I know nothing about any suitcases or any lady. Now, I'm going to lock up the apartment, and I'd be glad if you would kindly go away. I've not been informed, and so I can't leave in the apartment any strange person whom I don't know. Once they left someone in the house of the pastry cook, Villiers, in our street, and he opened their wardrobe and ran away. I've nothing against you, continued Švejk, when he noticed that the young lady was getting desperate and beginning to cry. But you definitely can't stay here. You must admit that, because the apartment has been put in my charge, and I'm responsible for every little thing in it. And so I must ask you again, if you would very kindly spare yourself the effort. Until I receive orders for the lieutenant, I don't even know my own brother. I'm sincerely sorry that I have to talk to you in this way, but in the army, there's got to be order. In the meantime, the young lady had pulled herself together a little. She took out of her bag a visiting card, wrote a few lines on it in pencil, put it into the charming little envelope, and said dejectedly, take this to the lieutenant. Meanwhile, I shall wait here for an answer. Here's 5 crowns for your trouble. That's not going to help, answered Švejk, offended by the obstinacy of the unexpected guest. Keep those 5 crowns. They are here on the chair, and if you like, come with me to the barracks and wait with me there. I'll deliver your letter and bring you the answer, but I'm afraid it's not possible for you to wait here. With these words, he dragged the suitcases into the hall, and rattling the keys like the turnkey of a castle, said significantly at the door, we're locking up. The young lady went out dejectedly into the corridor. Švejk shut the door and went ahead. The visitor trod behind him like a little dog. and caught up with him when they went to buy some cigarettes at a tobacconist. Now she walked beside him and tried to start a conversation with him. You'll really deliver it? Of course I'll deliver it if I said so. And you're sure you'll find the lieutenant? That I don't know. They walked side by side again in silence until, after quite a long time, his companion began to speak again. Do you think then that you won't find the lieutenant? No, I don't think that. And where do you think he might be? I don't know. Then the conversation was interrupted for a long time until it was resumed once again by a question from the young lady. You haven't lost the letter? I haven't lost it yet. And so you'll be sure to give it to the lieutenant? Yes. And you'll find him? I've already said I don't know, answered Švejk. It amazes me how people can be so inquisitive and continually ask the same question. It's just as though I stopped every second person on the street and asked them what was the date today. In this way, her attempts to make a deal with Švejk came to a definite end, and the rest of the journey to the barracks passed in complete silence. It was only when they stopped at the barracks that Švejk invited the young lady to wait and started to chat with the soldiers at the gate about the war, which must have made the young lady awfully happy because she walked up and down the pavement nervously and appeared extremely miserable when she saw that Švejk was persisting in his talk, with just as stupid as an expression on his face as could be seen on the photograph published at the time in the World War Chronicle under the headline, "The Heir to the Austrian Throne in Conversation with Two Pilots Who Shot Down a Russian Airplane." Švejk sat down on a bench at the gate and explained that on the Carpathian battlefront, the army's attack had failed, but on the other hand, the commander of Przemysl, Commander Kuzmanek, had reached Kiev, and that behind us in Serbia there remained 11 bases, and that the Serbs would soon be too tired to go running after our troops. And then he started criticizing certain famous battles and made the truly Archimedean discovery that a detachment has to give itself up when it is encircled on all sides. When he had been talking long enough, he thought it was right to go out to tell the desperate lady that he would be back again at once and that she shouldn't go anywhere. Then he went upstairs to the office where he found Lieutenant Lukáš, who was just at that moment solving for a subaltern a trenches exercise and was reproaching him for not being able to draw and for having no idea at all about geometry. Look, this is how you have to draw it. If on a given straight line, we have to draw a perpendicular line, we must draw it so that it makes a right angle with it. Do you understand? If you do it this way, you will have your trenches running in the right direction and not in the direction of the enemy. You will be 600 meters away from him. But the way you've drawn it, you'd be pushing our positions into the enemy's line, and you'd be standing with your trenches perpendicular over the enemy, whereas you need an obtuse angle. It's really quite simple after that, isn't it? And the lieutenant in reserve, who in civil life was a bank cashier, stood in complete despair of these plans. He could not understand anything, and heaved a sigh of relief when Švejk advanced towards the lieutenant. Humbly report, sir, a lady sends you this letter and is waiting for an answer. And as he said that, he gave a knowing and familiar wink. What the lieutenant read did not make a favorable impression on him. It was written in German. Dear Heinrich, my husband is persecuting me. I must absolutely stay a few days with you. Your Batman is a proper swine. I am unhappy. Your Katie. Lieutenant Lukáš sighed, took Švejk into an empty office next door, shut the door, and began to walk up and down between the tables. When he finally stopped by Švejk, he said, the lady writes that you're a swine. What on earth have you done to her?
He's reading my...
I haven't done anything to her, humbly reports sir. I've behaved very respectably, but she wanted to install herself in the apartment at once. And because I had not any orders from you, I didn't leave her alone there. Into the bargain, she brought 2 suitcases with her, as if she was coming home. The lieutenant gave another loud sigh, and Švejk did the same. "What did you say?" shouted the lieutenant menacingly. "Humbly report, sir, it's a difficult case. 2 years ago, a young lady came into an upholsterer's in Wojciechowska Street, and he couldn't get her out of the apartment and had to gas both her and himself, and that was the end of the fun. It's difficult with women. I can see right through them." "A difficult case," repeated the lieutenant after Švejk, and he had never uttered a more truthful word. Dear Heinrich was definitely in an ugly situation. A wife, persecuted by her husband, comes to him on a visit of several days, just when he's expecting to have Mrs. Mitskova from Trebon. She's coming to him for 3 days to repeat what she had regularly offers him every quarter when she comes to Prague to do her shopping. And then the day after, a young lady is going to come. She had definitely promised him that she would let herself be seduced after having thought it over for a whole week, as she was going to be married to an engineer a month later. The lieutenant now sat on the table with his head in his hands. He pondered in silence, but for the time being, he could think of nothing else except to at last sit down at the table, take official paper and envelope, and write as follows. "Dear Katie, on duty until 9 p.m., back at 10. Please make yourself at home with me. As for my Batman, Švejk, I've already given him orders to oblige you in everything. Your Heinrich." "Take this letter to the lady," said the lieutenant. "Your orders are to behave to her politely and tactfully and fulfill all her wishes, which you must regard as a command. You must behave gallantly and serve decently. Here's 100 crowns, for which you must account to me, in case she may want to send you for something, and you can order her lunch, dinner, and so on. Then buy 3 bottles of wine and a packet of cigarettes. All right then, nothing more for the present. You can go, and once more let me impress upon you that you must obey her slightest whim." The young lady had already lost all hope of seeing Švejk, and was therefore very surprised when she saw him coming out of the barracks in her direction with a letter. After saluting her, he handed her the letter and reported, "By order of the lieutenant, madam, I am to behave to you politely and tactfully, serve you decently, and obey your slightest whim. I am to feed you and buy for you whatever you wish. I have received from the lieutenant 100 crowns, but out of it I have to buy 3 bottles of wine and a packet of cigarettes." When she had read the letter, her resolution returned, which was manifested by her ordering Švejk to call a fiacre, and when this was done, she bade him sit on the box seat with the driver. They drove home. When they were in the apartment, the lady was excellent in playing the role of mistress of the house. Švejk had to carry her suitcases into the bedroom and beat the carpets in the courtyard, and a tiny little spider's web behind a mirror brought her into a state of fury. And I'm going to pass this on to the talented actor and singer, Katarina Vizina.
Everything seemed to confirm that she intended to dig herself in for a long time in the position she had won. Švejk sweated. After he had beaten the carpets, she took it into her head that the curtains had to be taken down and beaten too. Then he got orders to clean the windows in the sitting room and in the kitchen. After that, she began to move the furniture about, doing so very nervily. And when Švejk moved in all from corner to corner, she was not pleased and made new plans and thought of new arrangements. She turned everything in the apartment upside down, but gradually her energy in building the nest began to peter out, and she stopped harrying him. She took clean bed linen out of the linen cupboard and put the covers on the pillows and eider down. It was clear that she did this with affection for the bed, which object induced in her a sensual trembling of the nostrils. She then sent Švejk to get lunch and wine, and before he came back, she changed into a transparent gown, which made her exceptionally alluring and attractive. At lunch, she consumed a bottle of wine, smoked many cigarettes, and got into bed, while Švejk in the kitchen was enjoying his army bread, which he soaked in a glass of some sweet spirit. "Švejk," could be heard from the bedroom. "Švejk." Švejk opened the door and saw the young lady in an alluring position on the pillows. "Come in." Švejk walked towards the bed. With a peculiar smile, she measured up his stocky figure and powerful thighs. Pulling aside the delicate material which veiled and concealed everything, she said severely, "Take off your boots and trousers. Come on." And so it happened that the good soldier Švejk could report to the lieutenant when he returned from the barracks, "Humbly report, sir, I fulfilled all the lady's wishes and served her decently according to your orders." "Thank you, Švejk," replied the lieutenant. "And did she have lots of wishes?" "About 6, answered Švejk. "And now she's sleeping as though quite exhausted by the ride. I did obey her slightest whim, sir." And now over to Chicago and to the students of Czech at the University of Chicago, Meg Doucette, Pierce Pramuka, and their professor, Irena Čajková. Meg?
While the masses of armies pinned to the forest by the Dunayettes and the Rabe stood under the rain of shells and artillery of every caliber, was tearing to pieces whole companies and burying them in the Carpathians. And while the horizons on all the battlefields blazed with burning villages and towns, Lieutenant Lukáš and Švejk went through an unpleasant idyll with a lady who had run away from her husband and had now made herself mistress of the house. When she went out for a walk, Lieutenant Lukáš held a council of war with Švejk on how to get rid of her. "It would be best, sir," said Švejk, "if her husband, who she's run away from and who's looking for her, as you said, was stated in the letter which I brought you, got to know where she was and came to fetch her away. We could send him a telegram that she's with you and that he could come and fetch her. There was a similar case last year with a villa in Schwentenrei, but then the telegram was sent by to the husband by the wife herself, and he came for her and boxed them both across the ears. Then they happened to be both civilians, but in the present case, the husband wouldn't dare to assault an officer. Besides, you're not guilty at all, because you never invited anybody. And when she ran away from home, she did it at her own risk. You'll see that a telegram like that will do a power of good, even if there are a few swipes across the jaw." "He's very intelligent," Lieutenant Lukáš interrupted him. "I know him. He's a wholesaler in hops. I must definitely speak to him. I'll send a telegram." The telegram he sent was very laconic and commercial. "The present address of your wife is," then followed the address of Lieutenant Lukáš's apartment. And so it happens that Mrs. Katy had a very unpleasant surprise when the hop merchant burst in through the door. He looked very circumspect and careful when Mrs. Katy, who did not lose her composure at this moment, introduced both gentlemen to each other. "My husband, Lieutenant Lukáš." She couldn't think of anything else. "Please sit down, Mr. Wendler," Lieutenant Lukáš said in a welcoming tone, and took a cigarette case from his pocket. "May I offer you one?" The intelligent hop merchant took a cigarette with great propriety, and, puffing smoke from his mouth, said in measured tones, "Will you soon be going to the front, Lieutenant?" "I have applied to be transferred to the 91st Regiment at Villiers, where I shall probably be sent as soon as I have finished the 1 year of volunteers training school. We need a lot of officers, and it's an unhappy feature of the situation today that young people who are qualified to be accepted as 1 year volunteers don't apply for it. They prefer to remain ordinary infantrymen rather than try to become cadets. The war has inflicted considerable damage on the hops trade, but I don't think it can last long," remarked the hop merchant, looking now at his wife and now at the lieutenant. "Our situation is very good," said Lieutenant Lukáš. "Today, nobody doubts that the war will end in victory of the Central Powers. France, England, and Russia are too weak against the Austro-Turco-German granite. It's true that we have suffered some small reverses on some fronts, But as soon as we break through the Russian front between the Carpathian Ridge and the Middle Dunajec, there's no doubt at all that it will mean the end of the war. And the French too will soon be threatened by the loss of the whole of eastern France and the penetration of the German army into Paris. That's now quite certain. Apart from that, our maneuvers in Serbia continue very successfully. And the departure of our troops, which is in fact only a redeployment, has been misinterpreted by many people in a way which is in complete conflict with what cool reason demands in the time of war. We shall very soon see that our well-calculated maneuvers on the southern front are bearing fruit. Please look here. Lieutenant Lukáš took the hop merchant gently by the arm, led him to a map of the battlefield, which was hanging on the wall, and showed him certain points, explaining, the eastern Vestfjords are an excellent base for us. As you can see here, we have great support in the Carpathian sector. If we make a powerful strike on this line, we shan't stop until we're in Moscow. The war will end before we think. And what about Turkey? Asked the hop merchant, thinking all the time how he could come to the point which he had come for. The Turks are holding well, replied the lieutenant, leading him to the table again. The president of the Turkish parliament, Kali Bey and Ali Bey, have come to Vienna. Marshal Lyman von Sanders has been appointed commander of the Turkish Dardanelles army. Wolf Pasha has just come from Constantinople to Berlin, and Enver Pasha, Vice Admiral Ustam Pasha, and General Javad Pasha have been decorated by our emperor. This is a very considerable number of decorations in such a short time. They all sat in silence opposite each other until the lieutenant considered it appropriate to interrupt the embarrassing situation with the words. When did you arrive, Mr. Wendler? This morning. I'm very glad that you found me at home, because in the afternoon I always go to the barracks and I have night duty. Because my flat is actually empty the whole day, I've been able to offer Madame hospitality. She's not troubled by anyone during her stay in Prague, being an old acquaintance.
The hop merchant gave a cough. Katya is certainly a strange woman, Lieutenant. Please accept my warmest thanks for everything which you've done for her. She took it to her head to go to Prague out of the blue because, so she said, she had to take a cure for her nerves. I was away. I came home and found the house empty. Katya had gone. Trying to put on as agreeable an expression as possible, he shook his head, his finger at her, and asked her with a forced smile, and so you thought, did you, that when I was traveling, you could travel too? Of course you didn't realize. Lieutenant Lukáš, seeing that the conversation was taking an awkward turn, led the intelligent hop merchant back to the map of the battlefields again, and showed him places which had been underlined, saying, I forgot to point out to you one very interesting circumstance. This great bend, which is facing southwest, where this group of mountains forms a major bridgehead. It is just against this spot that the Allies' offensive is directed. By closing this railway line, which links the bridge ahead with the enemy's main defense line, communication between the right flank and the Northern Army on the Vistula must be broken. Is that quite clear to you now? The hop merchant answered that everything was quite clear to him, and fearing, with his natural tact, that what he said might be taken up as a hint, he mentioned on returning to his place, during the war, our hops have lost their markets abroad. France, England, Russia, and the Balkans are all now lost for hops. We're still sending hops to Italy, but I'm afraid that Italy will get drawn into it soon. But when we've won, it'll be we who dictate the prices for our goods. Italy is keeping strictly neutral, the lieutenant said to cheer him up. Then why doesn't she admit that she's bound by the Triple Alliance with Austria, Hungary, and Germany? The hop merchant suddenly burst out in anger. His head became suddenly full of everything. Hops, his wife, the war. I expected that Italy would march against France and Serbia. The war would then have been over. The hops in my stores are rotting. In the home market, trade is poor. Exports amount to nothing, and Italy is keeping strictly neutral. Why did Italy renew her Triple Alliance with us in 1912? Where is the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Marquis of Sangiano? What's the gentleman doing? Is he asleep or what? Do you know what annual turnover I had before the war and what I have now? You mustn't think I don't follow the events, he continued. He looked furiously at the lieutenant, who was calmly blowing from his mouth rings of cigarette smoke which caught and broke each other up, while Miss Kati followed the operation with close interest. Why did the Germans go back to the frontier when they'd already been near Paris? Why is such heavy gunfire going on between the Maas and the Moselle? Did you know that at Combre and Loire near the March, 3 breweries have been burnt down, where we used to send every year more than 500 sacks of hops? And in the Vosges, the Hartmannsweiler brewery has burnt down, and the enormous brewery in Niedersbach near Mulhausen has been razed to the ground. That meant the loss of 1,200 sacks of hops from my firm every year. 6 times the Germans have fought the Belgians for the Klosterhoek brewery. There, you have a loss of 350 sacks of hops a year. He was so furious that he couldn't go on speaking, but only stood up, advanced towards his wife, and said, "Kati, you come home with me at once. Put on your things." "All these happenings irritate me very much," he said a moment later in an apologetic tone. "Before, I used to be completely calm. And when she went away to put on her things, he said in a low voice to the lieutenant, 'This is not the first time she's behaved like this. Last year, she went away with a probationary teacher, and I found them as far away as Zagreb. I used the opportunity to make a contract with the city brewery in Zagreb for 600 sacks of hops. Yes, the South used to be a gold mine. Our hops went as far as Constantinople. Today, we're half ruined. If the government limits production of beer at home, it will deal us the final blow.' And lighting the cigarette which had been offered to him, he said in despair, 'Warsaw alone used to buy 2,370 sacks of hops. The largest brewery there is the Augustinian. Its representative used to visit me regularly each year. It's enough to make one desperate. It's a good thing I've got no children.' This logical deduction from the yearly visit of the representative from the Augustinian brewery in Warsaw caused the lieutenant to give a gentle smile, which the hop merchant noticed, and so he went on in his explanation. The Hungarian breweries in Sorpon and Gross-Kanza bought from my firm for their export beer, which they exported as far as Alexandria, an average of 1,000 sacks of hops a year. Now they refuse to order anything on account of the blockade. I offer them hops 30% cheaper, but they don't order a single stack. Stagnation, decay, misery, and on top of that, domestic troubles." The hop merchant was silent for a moment, but his silence was interrupted by Miss Kati, who was ready for the journey. "What are we to do with my suitcases?" "They'll come and fetch them, Kati," said the hop merchant with relief. He was glad in the end that everything had gone off with a row and a scandalous scene. "If you want to do any more shopping, it's high time that we went. The train goes at 2:20. Both took friendly leave of the lieutenant, and the hop merchant was so glad it was all over that on his way to the hall, he said to the lieutenant, "If you should be wounded at the front, and God forbid that you should, come and convalesce with us. We'll look after you with every care."
Returning to the bedroom where Miss Kati had dressed for the journey, the lieutenant found on the wash basin 400 crowns and the following letter. "Lieutenant, you didn't stand up for me before that gorilla of a husband of mine, that prize blockhead. You allowed him to drag me away like some chattel he had forgotten in your apartment. And in doing so, you took the liberty to observe that you had offered me hospitality. I hope that I have not caused you more expense than the enclosed 400 crowns, which please share with your servant." Lieutenant Lukáš stood for a moment with the letter in his hand and then slowly tore it to pieces. With a smile, he looked at the money lying on the wash basin, and seeing that when she was doing her hair before the mirror, in her agitation, she had forgotten her comb on the table, he placed it among his fetish relics. Švejk returned in the afternoon. He had gone to look for a stable pincher for the lieutenant. "Švejk," said the lieutenant, "you're in luck. That lady who stayed with me has gone. Her husband took her away. And for all the services which you performed for her, she left 400 crowns on the wash basin. You must thank her nicely, or rather her husband, because it's his money which she took with her on the journey. I shall dictate you a letter." And he dictated. Honored sir, please convey my most cordial thanks for the 400 crowns, which madam, your wife, gave me for the services which I performed for her during her visit to Prague. Everything which I did for her, I did with pleasure, and therefore I cannot accept this sum, but send it. Now then, just go on writing, Švejk. What are you fidgeting about? Where did I stop? But send it, said Švejk with a trembling voice full of tragic emotion. Good, then, but send it back with the assurance of my deepest respect. Respectful greetings and a hand kiss to Madam Josef Švejk, officer's orderly to Lieutenant Lukáš. Finished? Humbly report, sir, the date is missing. December 20th, 1914. Now write the envelope, take these 400 crowns and carry them to the post office and send them to that address. And Lieutenant Lukáš began happily to whistle an aria from the operetta, The Divorced Lady. One more thing, Švejk, he called out when Švejk was going to the post office. And what about the dog which you went to look for? I've got on my hands on one, sir. A jolly pretty animal, but it'll be difficult to get it. Tomorrow, I hope, I'll be able to bring it after all. It bites.
Thank you, Chicago, for rounding out that part.
Za císaře pana a jeho rodinu. Za císaře pana a jeho